Hey guys, I am so excited to be jumping in with you on the midweek series that we've been doing, Faith Under Fire. This is the third week in our series, and if you are just now joining us, we have been going through the life of Joseph. In week one, Kyle walked us through what it was like to be a part of Joseph's family, and he really unpacked the destruction that can come out of favoritism. Last week, Dakota reminded us that when we are at our darkest points, the only hope that we really have in those moments are to trust in God. And we see Joseph at that dark point in prison last week where he basically has hit rock bottom. He has been put in prison because he was falsely accused, right? And I don't know that it gets a whole lot lower than that, but there we find Joseph. But because he chose to trust God in spite of his circumstances, what we see is God begin to transform him into this incredible spiritual leader. While in prison, Joseph is encouraging the inmates that are with him. He is beginning to influence and have influence amongst the guards in the prison where he's at and being given positions of leadership. Joseph is beginning to interpret dreams while he is in prison. And you can kind of just sense the momentum building as Joseph is in this dark place because of his trust in God. You sense God's doing something. God's building something in Joseph's life. And we wait for it and we wait for it and we wait for it. And then bam, Pharaoh has a dream and he doesn't know what to do about his dream. And so we see one of Joseph's former inmates who has access to Pharaoh go, hey, I know a guy. And so Joseph goes from being in the prison cell to interpreting Pharaoh's dream and becoming the number 2 guy in all of Egypt. He goes from rock bottom to ruling a nation with Pharaoh. And this is where we pick up this week in Joseph's life, right? He is now a ruler in the nation of Egypt, of the Egyptians at that time. And in week 3, this is what we are going to tackle tonight. How do we overcome the hurts of our past? You know, I don't know about you guys, but my husband and I really enjoy watching movies. My husband is a once and done guy, right? He'll watch a movie one time and then he's done. He doesn't need to rewatch it again. I'm a little different. If I have a favorite movie, I will watch that movie over and over again. In fact, there are a couple of movies that I watch every single year, okay? And I have to be honest, sometimes what I do, and I don't know if you can relate to this, if I don't have time to watch the entire movie, or if I'm just really excited about getting to the highlights, I'll fast forward through some of the less exciting parts because I really want to get to the parts where all the drama is, right? And that's what I'll do. And I don't know if you can relate to that at all, but that's me. And I realized a little while back that I was doing that with the life of Joseph. So his life covers the end of Genesis. It's at 14 chapters at the end of Genesis. So there are times when I would go back to study Joseph, but I would kind of skip parts and get to the good stuff, right? And I was doing that 4 years ago when I was studying his life again. And so I'm reading and I get to this part where we're at, where Joseph is helping Pharaoh rule Egypt. And then I skip ahead from chapter 41 in Genesis to chapter 42, where Joseph's about to see his brothers again for the first time. And as I'm getting ready to do that, I get this nudge from the Lord, and he's like, Amie, you skipped a part. And I'm like, well, yeah, but we kind of we know what happens in this part, right? Okay, so he's ruling Egypt with Pharaoh. He gets a wife. He has some sons. Everything that Joseph predicted from Pharaoh's dream is coming true exactly as he said. There are these 7 years where there is plenty of food in Egypt, and Joseph is storing up the extra, all these things, right? I know what happens here. I'm skipping ahead to the good stuff, where the drama is between Joseph and his brothers. And God's like, stop. Go back and read it again. I'm like, okay, because when God nudges you to do something, it's a good idea to do it. So I go back and I read it again, and I'm like, yeah, just like what I said. And he says, stop. Go back and read it again, but slower this time. And so I just stop everything and I take several days to just study the period of Joseph's life between when he becomes number 2 in Egypt and before he meets his brothers again. And I have to say that what I learned about this time in Joseph's life completely changed the way I viewed how he walked into the last portion of his life with his brothers. It changed my perspective. And I also realized that oftentimes I find myself, and maybe you'll find yourself in this stage. The stage of life where you've made it out of the hardships, but you still are holding on to some of the baggage that came from the hard times in your life. I think when we look at the life of Joseph on the surface, we're like, well, there's not a whole lot I can relate to, right? I've never been a victim to human trafficking. I've never been falsely accused and ended up in prison as a result of it, right? So I can't relate to that. But as we go back through and we've walked through his life the way Kyle and Dakota helped us do, we can begin to see things that we can relate to, right? Joseph, for a good portion of his life, was under enemy fire. He was experiencing hardship after hardship, and it just kind of felt like after a while, gosh, is this guy ever going to get a break? And when you even trace it back to the beginning, his time with his family, right? You see that he is suffering some consequences of his own making, but a lot of the things that he was experiencing was really the result of choices of other people. You look at Jacob, gosh, it's apparent Jacob did not take 101 in parenting, right? We see this destructive influence of favoritism and what it did to his sons and how it ruined Joseph's relationship with his brothers. We see there's family tension. We can relate to family tension. We see that there's jealousy. Gosh, a lot of us can relate to jealousy. We see that there's betrayal and lies to cover it up. Is that something that any of us can relate to? We see when Joseph makes his way as a slave in Egypt, that while God was with him and granting him favor in some ways, he was also experiencing inappropriate advances from Potiphar's wife. We see him being mistreated. We see him being falsely accused and in prison, in spite of the fact that one of his inmates says, I'm going to remember you when I get out, and I'm going to speak well of you. 2 years passed before any of that happened. I wonder if any of us can relate to what it feels like to be forgotten. And so, yes, we find Joseph finally getting his break. But he has this life of baggage that he is bringing with him. And it's in this context that we're going to read in Genesis chapter 41, starting with verse 45. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but no one will be able to raise his hand or foot in the land of Egypt without your permission. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphanath-Paneah, and gave him a wife, Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt, and Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Joseph left Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout the land of Egypt. During 7 years of abundance, the land produced outstanding harvest. Joseph gathered all the excess food in the land of Egypt during the 7 years and put it in cities, and he put the food in every city from the fields around it. So Joseph stored up grain in such abundance, like the sand of the sea, he stopped measuring it because it was beyond measure. 2 sons were born to Joseph before the years of famine arrived. Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, bore him the sons, and Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, meaning God has made me forget all my hardships in my father's household. And the second son, his name was Ephraim, meaning God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Then the 7 years of abundance in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was a famine in every country, but throughout the land of Egypt there was food. Then extreme hunger came into the land of Egypt, and the people cried out to Pharaoh for food. And Pharaoh told all of Egypt, go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you. Because the famine had spread across the whole country, Joseph opened up all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Every nation came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, for the famine was severe in every land. So this was the period where things were good. Things were good for Joseph, finally looking up. And you might be asking me the question, what's the problem? That was the question that I'd ask. What's the big deal? We got the facts. Great. And then when I looked a little closer, I began to ask some questions. You have Joseph now, right? He is at the top. He is traveling all through Egypt. He can go where he wants. He can do what he wants. People look to him not only for answers, but they do his bidding. For 7 years, this is going on. What do we see Joseph never do? Where do we see Joseph never go? We don't ever see Joseph inquiring about his family. We don't ever notice Joseph making a trip back to Canaan to find out if his father is alive or if Benjamin is alive. And you're like, okay, so he didn't go. Maybe he couldn't go. Well, okay, that might be the case. But the most powerful guy in Egypt can't even send a messenger to go inquire to see if his family's still alive, to see if everybody's okay, even after the famine starts, and he knows that every nation is suffering. You don't think it ever crossed his mind? I think God gives us some insights to what's going on in Joseph's heart at this time through the names that he gives his son. What does he call his firstborn? Manasseh. Which means God has made me forget. There's some irony in this name. I don't know if you can pick it up. If you asked me, what's your name? And I said, God made me forget. What would you want to know? Forget what? Right? So imagine Joseph naming his son God made me forget, and every time he looks at God made me forget, he remembers what? And just in case we miss it, the Bible tells us exactly what? The hardship in my father's household. Joseph remembers what happened back then. He hasn't forgotten, and he has a son that reminds him of it all the time. And then his second son is named God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Not only has he not forgotten that this was the land of his affliction, where he was imprisoned and probably spent the majority of his 20s in prison, because he was 30 when he entered into Pharaoh's ruling with Pharaoh. God has made me fruitful. God has made me forget, and God has made me fruitful. I want to forget and I want to move on. And that's what we see Joseph doing, trying to forget and trying to move on. But the funny thing is, the very thing Joseph is trying to forget, the very people Joseph is trying to forget, show up on his doorstep. Why does God do that? Maybe you can relate to that. Are there things that have happened in your life and you're like, I just want to forget about it. I just want to move forward. I don't want to have to deal with that. I don't want to have to remember it. I don't want to have to walk through it. I just want to walk forward. And then it seems like God keeps bringing it up. And you're like, God, why are you doing that? Why can't I just move on? Why can't we just forget this ever happened? Here's the thing, guys. If God brings up your past, it's because he's not done working. When he called you to be his, he didn't just call you and want you to give him your whole heart. He wants your heart to be whole. And so many times we get satisfied with throwing a Band-Aid on top of our wounds and we just want to move forward like everything's good. And God's like, no, we got to talk about this. We got to talk about what happened. We got to address it because you're still walking around wounded. Jesus didn't go to the cross so that we could move forward wounded. He went to the cross so that we could move forward healed. And so sometimes God brings up the past so that he can heal our hearts. And this is what he did with Joseph. And we see that. In chapter 42, his brothers show up literally at Joseph's house, right? And it's when this happens that Joseph is forced to face the reality and the hurts of his past. And as we start reading in chapter 42 and 43 and 44, we begin to see God unpack this in Joseph's life and begin to give Joseph his perspective on what God was doing. And guys, he will do the same thing for us if we are willing to stop for a minute and address the things of our past and ask God to help us see the past through the lens of his perspective. Let me tell you what it will do for you. The first thing, when we adopt God's perspective, when we choose and we ask him, God, help me to see this in light of what you see. The first thing that it helps us do is it helps us to see God at work, right? So in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, Paul tells us, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those that love him. In all things, not just the things that originate with God, not just the things that are of him, but in all things. You notice Paul doesn't say all things are good, and certainly not everything was good in Joseph's life. But he works in all those things. And actually, in Joseph's life, we see God tell us in Genesis chapter 39, 3 different times, the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. And you're like, well, God, how would God use things that are, what happened in Joseph's life? They were wrong. They were bad. They didn't originate with God. And James tells us that God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone to do evil. So we know these things didn't come from him. They came from man's own choices. They came from the enemy. But this is the beauty of the gospel and what God has done for us. God enters into our mess and he starts to work. So when we choose to put on the lens of God's perspective, he will begin to show us where he has entered into our mess, whatever that looks like for you. And he will show you that he has begun to work and where he has begun to work. And he did that for Joseph, and we're going to see that play out in the end. There's a second thing that adopting God's perspective will do for us. When we ask God to help us see through the lens of what he's doing, we begin to see where true healing comes. So Robbie, my son, some of you might know him. In 8th grade, the night before summer camp, he invites a couple buddies over. It's going to be a fun night, hanging out with the buds, next morning heading to summer camp, right? Robbie had some fireworks under his bed, and he asked if he could play with the fireworks with his buddies out in the street. And we said, sure. We went out with him. He went out there. They lit fireworks. It was a good time. We blew things up. It was excellent. The neighbors were disturbed. Bonus, right? And so the rest was put away. We went back inside, and I'm just kind of muddling around the house. And all of a sudden, I hear in the house, boom, 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 feet going. Bathroom door opening, bathroom door slamming. That's usually an alarm in my house. So I'm listening more carefully, and I hear boom, 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 boom. My daughter going in and opening the bathroom door and slamming the bathroom door where Rob is. So I'm listening a little more carefully, and I hear, don't tell mom, don't tell mom. All right, at which point I know it's time for me to enter into the bathroom to find out what is going on. Well, turns out, after the fireworks were put away, blowing up things is a lot of fun, and playing with fire also seems fun, and so he and his buddies decided to take hand sanitizer and a lighter and just see what they could do. Well, little did Rob know that some of the hand sanitizer that they were putting on different things out on the street had gotten on his hand, and he went to go turn the lighter on, and he burned his hand really badly. Enough that he ended up having to go to the ER the night before summer camp. Fortunately, it was only 2nd-degree burns, so we were able to wrap it and we could send him to camp, right? Here's the thing. Robbie was playing with fire. And in 8th grade, he didn't know and understand the implications of him playing with fire. He didn't possess all of the knowledge that he needed to know how to handle the fire. And you guys, when we are under fire and we experience things in our life that cause us injury, we have this propensity to want to fix it ourselves. But what was true about Robbie at the time is true about us. We do not possess everything that is necessary to know what to do with the fire that has come into our life from the enemy. There is only one who knows what to do with that, and he is the refiner. Taking what the enemy means for our destruction and turning it into our good, that is his specialty, not ours. But this is what we have a tendency to do. We have a tendency, when we get hurt and wounded, we want to put ourselves in the refiner's place. And we try to make sense of the mess. and we try to control the mess, and we try to do what we can about the mess, but we don't know how to handle the mess. And oftentimes we make it worse. And these are the times, guys, when we look at some of the wounds from our past, and it causes us to avoid people because we don't want to get hurt again. It causes us to do things that make us feel like we're in control, like maybe controlling our eating. And we binge and we purge because we just need to control something. Or maybe the pain that we've experienced because of things that have happened in our past, we just want to figure out a way to control it and get rid of it. And so what do? We do destructive things and we cut because we don't know what we're doing with the fire. We don't know what to do. And God is asking us, will you just give it to me? I will make sense of your mess. And I will heal your wounds. When we begin to see what's happened in our lives through the lens of God's perspective, we understand that he's the only one we can run to make sense of it all. My friend Tanya, she was supposed to come for girls' retreat this last spring. And I'm still hoping that that God will open up doors at some point for her to come and talk to us, because she's got an amazing story that relates to this specifically. So she grew up in a really, really difficult situation, really rough childhood. Her mom was an addict. And the choices that her mom ultimately made had such grave results in Tanya's life. Ultimately, she had to be taken away from her mom, and I don't want to take her story from you, because I'm hoping someday she'll be able to share it. But fair enough to say, the choices that her mom made led to a series of events in Tanya's life that were really destructive. But here's the thing about your mom, right? You always hope that things could be better. And I remember a number of years back when her mom was older, Tanya's an adult, and Tanya's mom died. And there was that moment when her mom died that she was just devastated. Because that hope that things could be different, right? That hope died when her mom died. And she really had to wrestle with God about her childhood. And I asked Tanya at one point, like, how is this impacting your relationship with God? How is this influencing you in your walk with God? And she said to me, in the midst of her disappointment, in the midst of her pain, who else am I going to go to but Jesus? I know he's the only one that can heal me from any of this. Seeing it from God's perspective helps us run to the one who can heal us. The third thing that seeing it from God's perspective will do is it will fuel our desire to forgive others. If we look at Joseph in the beginning, right? After he had gone through these 7+ a couple years before he sees his brothers, we do not observe a Joseph that had really gotten over it, despite his attempts to forget and move on, right? What do we see in chapter 42? His brothers come and they kneel before him at his house, and what does Joseph do? Even though he recognizes them, he treats them like a stranger. He speaks to them harshly. He accuses them of being spies, and he throws them into prison. This is not the behavior of someone who has moved on. This is not the behavior of someone who has forgiven. But what God does with Joseph during this time, as Joseph begins to look at and see how God is working, as Joseph begins to surrender the circumstances of his life, do you know what we hear Joseph say? He asks this question, am I in the place of God? I don't understand it all, but I understand what God can do and what I'm not capable of doing on my own. And I'm done trying to fix this on my own and handle it myself. Am I in the place of God? As he begins to work through this, we see a much different Joseph as the story progresses, as his story progresses. In fact, when Joseph finally decides to tell his brothers, after a series of events and a series of tests that Joseph puts before his brothers to see if his brothers had even changed, he finally decides, I'm gonna put all my cards on the table. I'm gonna tell them who I am. And in tears, he says to them, do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. We see a Joseph that is not operating out of woundedness anymore, like at the beginning. We see a Joseph that is operating out of healing. We see a Joseph that's forgiving. Because you guys, when we see things from God's perspective, when we see that he's working and that he is capable of redeeming every bad thing that's ever happened to us, when we see that healing can only come from him and that he is ready and waiting for us to come to him to make sense of our mess, the need to hold on to wrongs that other people have done, it just doesn't seem productive anymore. In fact, you begin to see that that is a tool of the enemy. And Paul talks about it. He encourages Christians in 2 Corinthians 2, 10 and 11. He says, forgive. And if you forgive, I'm going to forgive. And why does he forgive? In order that Satan may not outwit us. When we take off the lens that Satan wants us to wear about our circumstances, when we put on the lens that God has for us, we're not willing to do anything that would let Satan outwit us. And we see him, not the people who've hurt us, as our true enemy. So where do we go from here? You might think, okay, I get it. I need to start thinking about my past through God's lens. I need to go to him for my healing. I know there's people in my life that I need to forgive. Where do I even begin? Can I encourage you to take time to read chapters 42 of Genesis and go all the way through chapter 50? And look at the process that David goes through as he begins the healing process in his life and the work that God begins to do on his heart. There's one thing first that I would say would be our first step in the healing process. Go to God with your pain and let him know about your pain. I went back through and I counted from chapters 42 through 50, and there are 8 times that God tells us in this account that Joseph wept over what happened with him and his dad and his brothers. You guys, there is a place for grieving the loss when something has happened to us, and going to God with our grief and being honest with him about how we are feeling about our past. Joseph had to do this multiple times. In fact, there are places in Genesis where it said that Joseph wept so loudly that people that weren't in the room with him could hear him. There is an appropriate time and place to grieve about our past. So that would be my step one. Go to God with your hurts and talk to him about it. Step two, we've got to confess if we are recognizing that we have attempted to be the refiner of our own lives. So these bad things have happened to us, things that have hurt us, right? Are there things that we have done to try to fix it on our own that have made things worse? God never intended for us to be the refiner. We're not equipped. And if that is something that has happened in your life, confess that to God. Talk to him about that. Ask for forgiveness for even thinking that you would be able to fix something better than God. The third thing, confess the truth of God's word over your situation. And this is where you take time and you look at what God's word has to say about what you've been through. There are promises in God's word for you, and you can begin to speak them over your life and over that situation. One of the first verses that you can look at is the one that we talked about in Romans, where God is working all things, in all things, together for your good. Begin to speak that, because here's what happens. When we begin to speak God's word over our circumstances, that is how we develop God's perspective on the things that have happened to us in our life. So first things, talk to God about your hurts and your past. Second thing, confess if you have played the role of refiner in your life. Third, confess the truth of God's word over your situation. And lastly, forgive those who were involved in hurting you. If Satan can't keep you wounded by you trying to fix things on your own, he will try to keep you shackled with unforgiveness. And it's a heavy weight, you guys. It is a way that he tries to outwit us. We've got to forgive the people that have hurt us and lay down the weight and the baggage. I'll end with this in Genesis chapter 50, verse 19. Joseph's brothers, after Jacob died, after their dad died, they began to worry again about what Joseph might really do to them. They were worried that he had not really forgiven them, but was only kind of keeping the peace for the sake of his dad. And when Jacob died, they were like, oh, we need to go to Joseph and try to, just see where we stand still. And these are the words that Joseph had for his brothers. Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Let's pray. Father God, I understand that many of us, even I at times, have gotten stuck in this place where I'm out of the hardship, but I still carry the baggage of my past. Because I'm not really ready to let you do the work on my heart and bring real healing into my life. Lord, if there are students that are listening to this message that find themselves stuck in that place, I pray that you would give them the courage to let you do heart surgery in their lives. That they would come to you, that they would be honest about their past with you, that they would confess if they have tried to become the refiner of their own life. God, that they would begin to believe what you say about their circumstances, not what the enemy says. And that they would forgive. God, I thank you so much that you have called us, that you died on the cross, not so that we could walk wounded, but that we could walk healed. Help us to trust you with our lives in this way. And it's in the name of Jesus I pray. Amen.